Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in September. September was a fairly good reading month. I read a total of 8 books. They were all 4 or 5 stars again, so I've been really good the last couple of months picking books to read that I've really enjoyed. So far October has not been quite so successful, but September certainly was a very good month for reading for me. Of the books that I read, 6 of them were borrowed, so I used the library quite a lot in September. 1 book was from my owned TBR, 1 book was a new book that I bought actually in September, so it was a new one this year, and 1 of the borrowed books was an ebook. 1 of the books was non-fiction, the rest were all fiction, and in terms of challenges, several of them completed towards some of my reading goals for the year, so 2 books counted for Read Around the World, 1 book was from my book Death Row, 1 book counted towards the Indie Challenge, 1 book was from the oldest on my TBR, 1 book caught me up to date on a series, and for the readathons that I was taking part in, I read 1 book for Voltathon, but that met all of the challenges, and I read 4 books for Tome Infinity and Beyond, and so saved 3 continents and read the group book for that. So I was very pleased with that. As I mentioned, all the books are 4 or 5 star ratings, so I gave 4 books 4 stars and 4 books 5 stars. And then just before I go into the books, my latest stat that I include is that at the beginning of September there were 550 books on my TBR. And at the end of the month there were 540, but this was actually because I have rearranged my Goodreads shelves slightly, and I'm going to be making a video that will be coming soon that is going to explain a bit more clearly, but basically I've created a separate bookshelf now on Goodreads for my Book Death Row books, and so at the end of September there were 21 books on Book Death Row, meaning a total on my TBR of 561. So it has gone up. That's because if you saw my book haul, I've managed to sort through all those Dickens books that I got for my birthday and added them all onto the correct shelves. So that's why there's been such an increase in my TBR this month. That video that I mentioned that I'm going to be filming later is also going to introduce a bit of an idea that I've had for trying to help me get through my TBR a bit quicker and try and get that number down a bit. So more on that later. Keep a watch out for that one if you're interested in that. So without further ado, let's go on to the books. Now, as I mentioned, I borrowed a lot of these books from the library and some of them I've had to take back, so I'll be putting up pictures, probably this side actually, for the ones that I don't have physical copies of at the moment. The first book I gave 4 stars to was Jude Messiah by Frank Herbert. This is the second book in the Dune series. So I read the first book sort of February, March time. I started it in February. I was doing Feb-June-ary with a few other booktubers. I enjoyed that one enough. It was sort of a 3.5 stars, 3.5 stars. I enjoyed the second one a lot more. I don't want to go into too much detail as well because it is a sequel. The second book is set approximately, I think it's about 15 years after the end of the first book. The new empire has more or less been established, but there's still a lot of plotting to try and bring down the new emperor. A lot of the characters that were in the first book, they're that little bit older, and it's how they interplay with this whole new political scene and understand their roles within it. I thought it was a really good development of the story, a good development of the characters. There was also introduction of a being called a Gola, which is essentially a reconstruction of a person that has died. So one of my favourite characters from the first book who was killed off is brought back in the second book. They've reconstructed his body from his DNA, this other race, but there's a lot about they've implanted certain conditioning into him that can be triggered by certain phrases, and no one entirely understands how much the Gola remembers of their previous life or how much has been put into them through this conditioning. So it was a really clever plot line, I thought, about this character and his inner conflict about who he actually is. Is he the same person he was before, or is he someone new? And the other characters trying to figure out if they can trust him or not, if he is the same person or not. So I thought that was a really good development, and it gave the book, some of those developments gave the book more of a science fiction feel. There were also more alien races in this one. There was one character who is from an aquatic race, so he's like shipped around in this giant fish tank essentially. That was quite fun. So there was a lot that I really enjoyed about this book, and I'm really keen to carry on with the series now. So the next book was also from a series, so the next book I gave 4 stars to was the Peppermint Tea Chronicles by Alexander McCall Smith. This is the 13th book in the Scotland Street series and it's newly released this summer. So I'm managing to keep up to date with that series because they're releasing one a year. So these are ongoing stories about people who originally all lived in this one house in Scotland Street in Edinburgh, although some of them now live in different houses, and it follows their stories. And it's kind of just slice of life, really. The characters are all really endearing. The most annoying character has left now, which was great because she was so annoying. Yeah, it's just sort of how their lives work out, really, and it's just a really comforting series. So I really do recommend them. The chapters are very short because each chapter is originally published as a daily excerpt in the Scotsman newspaper, so it's a serialised novel, really. There's lots of really enjoyable characters, and although 13 books sounds like a lot, actually because the chapters are so short, it's a really easy read, and so I really do highly recommend them. Start from the beginning, 44 Scotland Street, and just work your way through getting to know all the different characters. I just really love that series. Yeah, so that's that one. So that brought me up to date with the 44 Scotland Street series because, as I say, one is released each year, so I'm trying to keep on top of them, getting them out from the library for the moment. Then the next book that I gave 4 stars to was, I actually have this one, was Renegades by Meyer. So I got this out from the library as well. This was the group book for the Voltathon readathon, and I also used it to tick off America for the Tome Infinity readathon, and this met every challenge for Voltathon, which, because it was the only book I managed to actually finish within that week, was quite helpful, really. So this is the first in a series. At the moment it's a duology, but I think there is actually a third one coming out soon. I really want to carry on with this series. It is set in a society where all forms of government were broken down by supervillains rising up and getting rid of governments. There was an age of anarchy because people with special powers were being persecuted, like in X-Men. So after a period of time where there was no ruling governments, all sorts of villains had risen to the surface, not just superpowered ones, but all your sort of gangs and crime syndicates and that were all ruining everyone's lives, essentially. And then from that, a group of superheroes arose and defeated all the villains and now are running things. But some of the anarchists, the supervillains, remain, and they live underground, and while they don't necessarily want things to go back to how they were in the Age of Anarchy, they don't agree with some of the ways that the Renegades, the superheroes, are running things. So one of them, Nova, decides she's going to infiltrate their headquarters and learn to be a renegade. There's a really clever sort of interplay of everyone's got a secret and who do you trust. I really loved the different ideas of what different superpowers could be. I really liked the relationship between the two main characters, between Nova and Adrian, who is a renegade. He's the son of the two leading renegades, but he has his own secrets too, and his superpower is really cool. He can draw stuff and make it come to life. Both of them have things they're trying to figure out and trying to avenge. So Nova's family were killed by a crime group, but she blames the renegades. They promised that they would protect them and then they didn't. And Adrian's mother was killed by a villain, but no one knows who. So they've all got stuff they're trying to figure out, and I thought it was really, really cleverly written, really beautifully put together. Really enjoyable series. It was my first time reading Marissa Meyer and I really enjoyed her writing style. So it did take me a little while to get into it and figure out who was who and what was going on, because everyone's got 2 names as well, so I had to keep flicking back. There's a very helpful cast list at the beginning that tells you who the characters are, what their pseudonyms are and what their powers are. Yeah, so I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to try and get Arch Enemies out from the library as soon as I can to carry on with this series before the third one comes out in the next couple of months. Then the last book that I gave 4 stars to was my book death row book of the month, which was Lucky Man by Michael J. Fox. So this is Michael J. Fox's first memoir about his diagnosis of Parkinson's disease and sort of his life up until that point, and how that diagnosis changed his life, and in some ways for the better as well. That's why he considers himself lucky, because it helped him actually make positive steps in his life in areas that he had been quite self-destructive previously. So I found it really interesting, really fascinating. When I started reading it, my dad asked me, what's the difference between a memoir and an autobiography? And I didn't have an answer for him, but now I think I do, Dad, if you're watching. I think a memoir means that they can tell it in whatever order they fancy and it doesn't have to make chronological sense, whereas from autobiographies I've read in the past, they tend to be more consistent in terms of timeline. So this jumped about all over the place and got a little bit confusing in places, but it was a really interesting insight into his life and career and into how Parkinson's disease affects people, because I didn't know very much about it, so I found that really interesting too. It was sort of a 3.5 stars, but because it's someone's life experiences, it's really difficult to rate that lower, so I rounded it up really a little bit generously. But I mean, there wasn't a problem with the writing. I quite liked the style. It was just some of the times when it jumped about, I lost track a little bit of where in his life we were at this point, and I found it a little bit confusing in places where the timeline jumped about. But overall, I really enjoyed it. He has written a couple of other books more recently. So this was published early 2000s, 2002, and I think there's at least one more, maybe two more recent ones, which I might try and see if the library has them. I got this one in a charity shop, and I don't think I would buy the others, but I would be interested to read them at some point. Yeah, so I probably won't keep this one, but I did really enjoy it, and if you're interested in celebrity biographies or actors, specifically actors biographies, this is a really good one. So yeah, a really interesting insight into his life. On to my 5-star reads, and the first book this month that I gave 5 stars to was Truthwitch by Susan Dennard. I picked this up because I follow Susan Dennard on Twitter, and she's been doing this choose your own adventure story called The Luminaries, which I am absolutely in love with. It's been going for about at least 4 months now, and we're nearing the end of the story, and it's so exciting, and every day I look forward to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which is when it gets updated in the UK, in UK Times. And I just want to actually shout out, I very much doubt that she'll be watching, but I have a lot of respect for Susan Dennard, because having enjoyed the Luminaries, I then picked up Truthwitch, and I now love this series. And then someone mentioned that she has another series called Something Strange and Deadly, which sounded really interesting, but then someone mentioned that it had zombies in it, and I have a massive fear of zombies, like they are my biggest fear. So I tweeted her and said how zombie-ish is it, and had some really lovely interaction with her where she tried to sort of explain how zombies feature in the story and how they are a part of it, but not a massive part, and encouraged me to give it a try, but also really kindly suggested that if I don't like it, you know, it's fine. I love Twitter for that you can have interaction with your favourite authors, and so I just got a lot of respect for her. So I read Truthwitch and I absolutely loved it. I love her writing style particularly. She just has a really lyrical writing style, but still manages to keep the stories fast paced. Whereas someone like Laini Taylor, who I also love, her writing style is really beautiful, really lyrical, but it feels quite slow moving at times. Particularly like Strange the Dreamer felt like it took a long time for the action to happen, whereas Truthwitch, the writing style is quite similar in some ways, but we were in the midst of the action right from the beginning, and loads happened on every page, and I saw her tweet the other day something. So The Luminaries, even though it's taken 4 months to tell the story because she only does a small part every day, a lot has happened in it, but it's still the same day. It still all happened in one day, and Truthwitch is very similar. All the action takes place over a couple of days, but it doesn't feel like it, and I didn't even realise until I saw her tweet that actually all this has happened really, really quickly. So I love the characters, I love the friendship between Safi and Azult, and I think that is a really common theme of people who love the books, love that friendship and how that is a central aspect of the story, really. I loved the magic system, how everyone has different witcheries and different powers that they can use. I'm really intrigued to keep reading the series, so I've managed to actually get Windwitch out from the library as well, so I'm going to try and read that very soon, but then that's all my library has, so I'm going to have to start buying them after that. I think there's a box set coming out of the first 3 books soon, so I might actually just treat myself to that and then wait impatiently for the rest of the series to be written and released. I loved the concept, I loved the sort of political intrigue. Again, it felt in a lot of ways like high fantasy because the world building was so solid and there was so much. I consider sort of political manoeuvrings to be quite a key feature of high fantasy, but again, because it was so fast paced, it wasn't a heavy read, it was an easy and very enjoyable read. It took me a little while to get into it, to get used to being able to read large chunks of the story in one go instead of 280 characters a day, but once I got into it, I loved it and couldn't put it down, and had a massive book hangover when I finished it. Although I've only actually technically read one of her books, I'm confidently saying that Susan Dennard is going to be a new favourite author for me. I really hope so. I mean, we'll have to see how the rest of the series goes, but at this point in time, I really, really love her work. The next book I gave 5 stars to was called Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin, I think I'm pronouncing that right, who is from Argentina. So this was for Tome Infinity Readathon. It also worked for my Read Around the World challenge as well. I was able to tick off Argentina. This I was reading for Tome Infinity, so it's kind of science fiction, but I would say it's just more generally speculative fiction. It didn't fit entirely comfortably in the sci-fi genre, maybe somewhere between sci-fi and horror. It's a really difficult book to explain, but basically the story is told as a conversation between a lady called Amanda and a boy called David, and Amanda's in hospital and she's dying, and something has happened to cause this illness that she has. David is trying to help her understand how she became ill, but David is not quite what he seems. He is the son of her friend, but there's also something not quite him about him, if that makes sense. Something is happening to the children of this village that they get sick, and then there's a wise lady who can help them not die, but then they're not quite themselves, and it's very complex. But it's only a really short novel, and I read it really quickly and really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure I was going to, because I was worried when I heard it's kind of horror, but actually it didn't feel like horror to me. It felt like sci-fi, it read like sci-fi. Yeah, I really loved it. I wasn't expecting to, and I was just really blown away by it. It was so intense and powerful and complex, and yet short and easy to read. So I really highly recommend it. This one was one I borrowed as an ebook from the library, which is something I might do a bit more of. I don't love reading ebooks, but actually because this one was so short, it was quite an easy read and it worked as reading it as an ebook. So yeah, so that was that one. Again, another one I highly recommend. I really recommend all the books I've read this month, or all the series I've read this month, because I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. Okay, and then the next book I gave 5 stars to was a new book that I bought. This was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. You have a look at how beautiful that cover is. The top bit is all glittery. So I swapped this one in to be my read for Asia for Tome Infinity because it came out in September and it's only very short. Toshikazu Kawaguchi is Japanese, the book is set in Japan. It's actually a bestseller in Japan and it's just been released in the UK, and I really loved it. So this is a book about time travel. The premise is that there's a cafe in Tokyo where you can go back in time, but only to things that happened within the cafe. So you have to sit in a particular seat, and if you leave that seat then you're brought back to the present. There's a set of very specific rules you have to follow, and this book follows the story of 4 different people who are wanting to revisit conversations from their life with people that they have lost in some form or another. I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. I'm going to be filming a review of it later, so look forward to that if you want to know more about my thoughts about this story. But I've never read anything like it, and that is one thing that will get a book 5 stars. If I enjoy a book and I find it unique, then it's probably going to get 5 stars from me. Fever Dream is the same. I've never read anything quite like it, which is why it got that rating from me. Yeah, this book was just beautiful, in places heartbreaking, really cleverly told as well, and is a very unique take on the time travel trope. So really highly recommend this one as well. Recommend all of these books, and look out for my review of this coming soon. And then the final book I read that I gave 5 stars to was also the final book I read for Tome Infinity, which was Ancillary Justice by Leckie. So this was a group book for Team Warfare, and I haven't said yet, actually Team Warfare won, whoop whoop. That was very exciting because I was worried that I wasn't reading enough compared with my friends on Twitter who were also taking part in the readathon. I felt like I was hardly reading anything. I only finished 4 books. But I still managed to contribute to my team winning, so that made me feel good about myself. This was our group book. This is the first in I think it's a trilogy about a race called the Raj. I'm not quite sure how you say it. The central character used to be the AI of a troop-carrying spaceship. Part of the crew of the spaceship were ancillaries who were essentially, how to explain it? So they were like captive people that the Empire had overtaken, and they used their bodies but implanted the AI's conscience into them, so they become a part of the AI. So what's the ship called? The Justice of Turin, when she was a ship, had maybe 100 ancillaries who, when her officers were planetside, some of the ancillaries would go with them, and they would also serve the officers that remained on the ship as well. At some point before this story takes place, the ship has been destroyed. It is on the blurb, so that's fine for me to say. So she is, this one body is all that remains of the Justice of Turin. So her consciousness that used to be an entire ship and thousands of ancillaries is now reduced to just one ancillary. So the story is told essentially in 2 timelines. It's all told from Justice of Torrhen's perspective. She's now calling herself Breck. It tells of her present, of how she is trying to essentially get revenge for what happened to her ship, but also she fills in the details of the past of how she's got to the point where she is now, and also her interactions with different characters. So she saves the life of an officer who at one point was an officer on her ship, who is called Syvarden, and Syvarden has been, after his ship was destroyed, has been in stasis and has woken up after 1,000 years and everything has changed. I hesitated then slightly on the gender of Syvarden because the people that Breck represents, the Raj, don't have gender, or they don't consider gender. So everyone in the book is referred to as she by Breck, but there are clues from other people that she talks to that some of the characters are male, but to her everyone is like the same gender, so she just refers to everyone as she, unless she is given indicators to tell her what gender the other person she's talking to is, which I found really a brilliant concept, to be honest. And I just found the story really engrossing, the ins and outs and the intrigue and the politics again, and the way it's told over various timelines, and her interactions with different characters, and basically this concept of what does it mean to be human, again covered really, really well in this story. Really love this, and I'm going to be trying to get the next book in the series again from the library. At some point I expect I will buy them, but I'm trying not to buy books at the moment if I don't have to. So yes, I should be able to hopefully get the next one from the library soon. So that's all the books I read in September. I have filmed a TBR for October, which hopefully you've already seen. If not, I'll link that for you in the description box below. I never used to make TBRs, monthly TBRs, but I've been taking part in a lot of readathons recently and it sort of made sense to make them, and actually people really seem to enjoy watching them, and it does help me plan out my reading a bit better, so I might carry on trying to make those. So just quickly going to say what I'm currently reading. So I have started the #1 Chinese Restaurant, which I'm reading. This was our Ninja Book Club pick for September. I'm also reading it for the Gilmore Girls readathon. I'm about halfway through. I'm not greatly enjoying it at the moment, but determined to finish it and see how it goes. It's intrigued me enough that I want to know what happens to the different characters, and we'll see how it goes. My book death row pick for October is Are You Dave Gorman by Dave Gorman and Danny Wallace. I haven't started it yet, but I'm going to probably start it today as well and sort of parallel read it with a couple of other things. I've been looking forward to reading this actually, so I'm quite pleased that I've picked it up this month, or will be picking up this month. Yeah, there'll be a bit more in the video that's coming that I mentioned about how I'm sort of slightly changing how I do book death row as well, try and get through a few more books, but this is the next one that I'm going to be reading for that. We also have our Ninja Book Club pick for October, which I have not got with me at the moment, and I can't even remember what it's called. I will try and put a picture of it here, which I will be getting to at some point in the month, but this has been quite a long video and it's going to take me ages to edit it, so I'm going to stop there. Yeah, so let me know what your favourite read of September was, if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. Did you take part in Voltathon or Tome Infinity, and how did you get on? Let me know all of that in the comments, and you can also follow me on social media. That information is listed in the description box. Please subscribe if you haven't, and like this video if you liked it. Yeah, and that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!